there's a difference between ideals and values, because like I had all these
Mm,
ideals of like, I'm gonna be an exclusively breastfeeding mom. I'm a home birth mom, like whatever, like all these ideals of like 100% or nothing. And then having to like have those ideals completely shattered.
Holy Wild Birth is a podcast embracing the reclamation of giving birth, rooted in God's original design, undisturbed.
Here, we share homebirth stories highlighting God's presence as the great midwife, as well as conversations about all aspects of a holistic, spirit-led childbearing year. From the perspectives of myself, traditional midwife Lauren Hall of Rooted in Eden Private Contract Association,
And me, holistic doula and birth keeper Brooke Collier of Sister Birth.
to choose a holy wild birth journey is to consecrate all your decisions unto the Lord.
And to reclaim creation unadulterated by centuries of human attempts to control and improve upon what God has already called good.
Please remember, birth is not a medical event, but a natural process. We are not your care providers, and this should not be taken as medical advice.
Hey sisters, welcome to another episode of Holy Wild Birth. I'm really excited for this one today for a couple of reasons. I have a fellow Michigan mama here on with me today, and she's going to tell us not only her birth story, but also about her breastfeeding journey. And in both cases, there's something a little bit unique about each one. For instance, her home birth was with her first child, and I think so often we assume that first-time moms don't have home births. Well, she's here to prove us wrong. And also, regarding her breastfeeding journey, she had a struggle, and she had it on her heart to just share really honestly with all of us about what that was like for her and what she learned through that experience. And I think it's really going to bless you. She has such a grace-filled message and such a positive outlook, and also some pretty sweet nervous system regulation techniques that I was just really praising her for that she used during her labor. So anyway, so many nuggets of goodness in here. I hope you'll really enjoy it. As we dive into today's birth story, just a reminder that the choices and beliefs of the mamas sharing their stories here are as individual and varied as the storyteller herself, and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or recommended actions of Lauren and or Brooke. Hey, Ella.
Hi.
I'm so glad you're on this podcast with me today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. This is so exciting.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to fill the listeners in and let them know that I have had the privilege of meeting you in person once around a campfire in my backyard for a sister circle here in West Michigan. But I haven't had a chance to talk with you since you actually had your baby, because you were quite pregnant at that sister circle, and we had our babies about 2 weeks apart. So this is my first time getting to hear your story too, and I'm real excited about it. But before we dive in, could you just tell everyone just like your name, where you live, what you're into, a little bit about your family?
Absolutely, yes. So my name is Ella. I live also in Western Michigan, in a smaller town a little bit north of where you are. And I am from Texas, moved here in the past couple of years. I, um, my partner and I sing in the jazz band that my partner and his brother, so my brother-in-law, play in. And that's really, really wonderful to kind of have like a family jazz band. I was kind of raised in a very musical family, and so I'm really excited to be passing that on to my son and any future children that we have.
That's so
Um,
cool.
yeah, and I also I teach a little bit online, and so I kind of have a couple things that I do, but not any kind of big career or anything. So motherhood is the most recent adventure that I have embarked on in my life.
And it's a big one.
Yes.
And because there's probably at least a couple of people wondering what the name of your jazz band is. Can they find you online, and what is it called?
Yeah, absolutely. So the band is called Third Coast Swing, and it is located in Western Michigan, and we play all around Michigan, mostly in the Grand Rapids area. But yeah,
So
we can
fun.
find us
So
on
fun.
Facebook, Third Coast Swing Band. I think there's a Third Coast Swing Band on Instagram too. So
Okay.
either of those.
Great. Thank you for telling us that. Okay. So this was your first baby, right?
Yes.
And like I was telling you before we hit record, it is relatively unusual to hear first time moms have their first baby at home. And so I'm really glad you're here because I think it's important that we tell the stories of how it can be really great even the first time. And we don't have to like go to the hospital and acquire some trauma before we decide to try it at home. But
Yeah.
did you hear a lot, like when you were pregnant and you would tell people that you were planning to have your baby at home? Did you hear that a lot? They're like, oh, I couldn't do that my first time. Or like, did you get kind of kickback?
Um, for sure. I heard the kind of term like, from people, I could never do that, or I would have never done that my first time. That was something I heard very often just because of, people's fears coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Or a lot of people being like, I wish I would have done that my first time. That was something I heard a lot. But honestly, from close family, I've been kind of a free spirited person most of my youth and young adult life, and people would probably categorize me as like a hippie, crunchy, whatever. So
Yeah.
no one was surprised that I was planning a home birth, and I think our families knew that no matter what, that like that was the plan, and that no amount of pushback would be really, like no one said anything about it in our close family, and everyone was really, really supportive and excited for us. And I actually have my aunt, my youngest cousin, was born at home. So it was nice to kind of have someone else in my family who had been through that to talk to. So my family was uh, they understood home birth because she had had one, and my mother was actually at my younger cousin's birth.
Oh, wow.
So,
Cool.
everyone's pretty familiar with it.
Oh, that's really great. And I relate to that too, in that I don't think anyone and who knew me well was surprised when I announced that we'd be having our first
Yeah,
baby at home either, because it was just kind of like a thing Brooke would do, you know? Um,
yeah,
and I think
exactly.
it's a lot, what you were saying, like having the confidence to own it also tends to shut down those who might want to argue with you about it. I think if you are like apologetically announcing, I'm gonna try to have my first baby at home, and you're like all timid or unsure about it, it's almost like people
Mhm.
reflect that back to you and how much they
Yeah.
push. But it sounds like you were just like, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do, of course. And you were just like confident, owned it, and it gets reflected back to you, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and I
Mm-hmm.
also live in a pretty small town, and so there's only one hospital, and there's only one OB, and it's just I've heard really not great things about people's experiences there. So
Mm.
it was kind of just an obvious thing. I was like, well, I'm not going to go there, you know. So I was really
Yeah.
just automatically excited to birth at home. I feel like, if I would have been in a place with a hospital with a really cool birthing unit, it would have been a consideration to birth in a hospital. But since I do live in the area I live in, it wasn't even a consideration. Like I was like, yep, I'm going to stay home for this.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So that was one of the reasons you chose home. And what other reasons made you decide that even for your first baby, you would go ahead and stay home?
Yeah, I just we actually live in a really wonderful house kind of in the middle of the woods. So I just kind of feel really comfortable, and I didn't want to have to leave my house. I didn't want to have to leave my home, and I don't have to worry about, neighbors or, anything like that. So it just made a lot of sense. And I also knew some midwives personally. And I knew people who had babies at like a birth center run by the midwife that I had hired to attend my birth. And so, just from word of mouth, I felt really excited to connect with the midwife that I was with. And she
Yeah.
actually, really cool story. She had attended a birth in my house just a couple years prior before we had
That's
lived here.
amazing.
So the people who lived here before, yeah, had their first baby at home. So, it was kind of just like a lot of connections. Like our band played at a festival run by my midwife's son. So
Oh
it all
my.
just kind of was just so many threads kind of coming together to make that experience just really perfect.
That's beautiful. It seems like it just kind of all came together for you so nicely and was like affirmed and reaffirmed by various
Mhm.
connections and happenstance. And that's really beautiful. Um, okay. So let me ask you one more question. What was it like for
Yes.
you having that conversation with your partner? Was that something he had to come around to, or was it like, of course, we're going to do this?
Sure. Yeah, it was just, automatically on the same page about it. He never questioned it. He was really excited for it. He's a very just like emotionally um I feel like emotionally stable is like a weird way to put it, but just like a really solid person and like doesn't have a lot of fears and anxieties. And so when I told him that's what I wanted to do, he was like, cool, that sounds awesome.
Great.
How can I support that? So it was, there was really no tension anywhere in my life about it. It was just everyone was really supportive.
Wow, that's so cool. So cool. All right. So walk us through, just tell us a little bit about your pregnancy and your prenatal care.
Yeah, I had a bit of trouble getting into the midwife at first because she was very, very booked out. And so I did start my prenatal care with an OB. And at the beginning of my pregnancy, it was just kind of a, a genuine roller coaster of emotions because I was not planning on getting pregnant anytime soon. And so it was a surprise pregnancy. And, we had to come to terms with that, that
Mm-hmm.
was the plan after not having that in the plan.
Yeah.
And then basically, like, literally 2 days after we had completely come to terms with it, gotten really excited, told our whole family, then I started having really significant bleeding and I bled for a few weeks. And that was really scary.
I
And so
bet.
I went to the ER at one point and got a scan just because, at 6 weeks pregnant, the baby is just so, so small. And so with the amount that I was bleeding, I was like, I cannot even imagine that I'm still pregnant, but something
Mhm.
in me is telling me that I am. And so I'm like really confused. And I
Yes.
would I would call the OB office and ask them like, hey, is there anything you guys can do to like clarify what's happening? And they're like, no, just if you have a miscarriage, you have a miscarriage, nothing we can do about it. So I was really frustrated. And so I just went into the ER because I was like, at least they'll do something about it. And so I was able to get confirmation that I was still pregnant and that everything was fine. But I did kind of put myself on a bed rest for a little while to allow that to take its course and just hope to kind of allow my body to heal what was going on and protect my baby and not overwork myself. And so that
Yeah.
was just really, really hard because before getting pregnant I was extremely active, and
Mm.
so staying home and having all of this anxiety about every time I'm going to the bathroom I'm bleeding, and so the first trimester of my pregnancy was very, very hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then having my first appointment with the OB, and it was just like the nurse in there was just so dismissive, and automatically when I walked into the office I was like, this is going to be my last appointment here. um
Yeah.
and I remember them asking me like, all right, when should you schedule your next appointment? I'm like, you shouldn't. Like, i'm not I'm not coming back, thank you though. And so I got in with the midwife at about 12 or 13 weeks, so right before I started my second trimester, and it was just really smooth sailing from there. And everything was cleared up with the bleeding. Um, and so, yeah, everything was really great for the rest of my pregnancy. And we moved into this beautiful house and
Mm.
just kind of got everything together for having a baby. And yeah, and then coming towards the end of my pregnancy, I was, my midwives and pretty much everyone in my life who had had a baby had told me like, okay, you're a first time mom, relax, don't get too excited about going into labor anytime soon, you'll probably go over, just heard that echoing all the time of like, you're going
For
to go over,
sure.
you're going to go over. And then it was so funny. The day before my due date, I like decided, my dog stinks. I should give him a bath at 40 weeks pregnant. And so I washed my dog and I came back inside, and I remember my partner and I sitting on the couch and we were talking to the baby, and we were like, you could come out. That would be kind of fun. We were telling him all the things that we had for him, all the things we were going to do with him, and,
Oh, how
just
sweet.
invited him.
Yes, yeah.
And then I went to the bathroom and had my first contraction. So it was like he heard me. And it was really, really kind of like I couldn't really tell if they were contractions at first, being a first time mom. It just felt like a really heavy pressure on my cervix. That kind of like once in a while I would feel a little wave of pressure, and I was like, ooh, this is exciting. And I was able to go to sleep and kind of wake up the next morning on my due date. And then at noon on my due date, I started having like actual labor contractions and was like, oh, okay, we're doing this.
So 40
Yes.
weeks exactly was when you had your first contraction? And it was right after this little heart to heart you had with your baby?
Yeah, well, I guess it was, the day before 40 weeks exactly. And then on 40 weeks exactly, I went fully into labor.
Gotcha.
And
That's
then my
amazing.
son was born 19 minutes after midnight, so he was technically born the next day. But in my mind, I just feel like he was born on his due date because, I was in labor the entire day, and it was midnight. It wasn't like it was the next day or anything.
Yeah, pretty darn close. I think that's so cool how directly you saw the correlation between your little chat with him and your labor beginning, because that's one of those mysterious parts about birth, like, and what determines when a baby is ready to come out. And that part of it is not scientifically provable. And yet I think you're not the only one who's had an experience like that, where there's something about like talking to your baby and just communicating to them that they're safe and you're ready for them, that I think can absolutely play a role in when labor starts. So it's fun how clear it was in your story.
Definitely. Yeah, and I was really, I had a lot of fun pretty much right up until he was born. I remember, that time frame from about 30 weeks to like 36 or 37 weeks, I was like so antsy. I was like, okay, I just want to have this baby. I'm so excited. And then after 37 weeks, like a wave of like realization hit me that like, oh my goodness, I am going to have a baby. And these are the last weeks of my entire life for the next, probably 20 plus years, that I will not be responsible for another human, like physically, like have to get someone else in the car or, whatever. And so I started to really enjoy myself those last couple weeks, just really enjoy, being able to go get in the car and go do things without second thoughts, or, without, or just being able to sleep all night, because I had great sleep during my pregnancy. So I was like, I'm going to enjoy this sleep so much. And I actually, 2 days before I had my baby, we had a gig at a local brewery, and I sang the entire night, 40 weeks pregnant.
You were amazing.
I had, and everyone was like, what are you doing here? I'm like, having fun.
I love it. I love it. Because you're right. Like that, when you have your first baby, Lauren and I were just talking about this today, actually. There is this kind of like end of an era, right? This end of your old self and the way that you understand and interact with your life and your time and your identity. And it comes to an end when your baby's born. And it's really sweet that you kind of saw that coming, I guess, from a little ways off, and decided to just immerse yourself in enjoyment of this part of your life that was never going to come back in quite the same way ever again. Yeah, good. I think it's important to do that. I don't think everyone does really see that coming in the way that you just articulated. But it's cool that you got to have that chance to kind of, live it up, enjoy it while you could.
Yeah.
And then you were ready to say, all right, I'm ready to make that crossing over from The old me, the old life, to the new me, the new life, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so a really cool thing about actually like the beginning of my pregnancy and then the actual day that I went into labor was when I found out I was pregnant and did all the calculations of like, okay, well then when's my due date, everything. I saw that my due date was November 12th, and I was like, I just have this feeling that, he'll be born on the first snow of the year. And, it was so silly. And I kept telling people that, and they were like, oh, it'll snow either before that, it won't snow before that. And so everyone was trying to like explain to me that he wouldn't be born on the first snow of the year. I'm like, I don't care. This is just how I feel. And he actually, the day I went into labor, it started snowing for the first time, which
Oh,
was really cool. And when he was born, he was born at midnight, and so the next day at like 8 or 9 a.m. when it got light out, I looked out the window and there was like 3 or 4 inches of snow. That's the first snow of the year. So I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool.
that's so cool.
Yeah, that was one of those really magical moments.
Absolutely magical. Oh man, and not to make too many parallels, but with my first, I was like, I want her to be born on the day the peonies bloom. So we had peonies in our yard, and I love
Yeah,
peonies. And guess what? She
she
was.
was.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So I feel like little things like that are just kisses from God. Like, I see you. I love you. You can have that
Absolutely.
little
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. All right. So tell us about your labor.
Yeah. So I went into labor like I said, like I kind of had like early labor contractions the night before my due date, but I felt like when labor started was around noon the next day when I started having like noticeable contractions that were a little bit less comfortable. And I would I was like sitting on the couch. We had like a pull-out futon in our living room at the time, and I was like laying there with my dog, and like I couldn't lay down through the whole contraction. Like I had to get up on my hands and knees and kind of like move around and wiggle. So I was like, okay, like I'm actually in labor. And I texted my midwife because I was having contractions and I had a little bit of like weird looking mucus come out, and so I was texting with her and she was texting back with me, and a couple hours after I started having contractions, I texted her back and I'm like, okay, like I'm pretty sure this is the real thing, because since I did have kind of like early weird contractions the night before, in my mind I was kind of anticipating that I might be having like early labor for a few days. Like I wasn't like in my head like I'm going to give birth to this baby tonight. I was kind of anticipating that it might go on longer, but once they started to really amp up, I was like, okay, this is actually happening. And so I told her like, all right, let's do it. And she calls me and she says, okay, I'm in Ohio. And I'm like, why would you go to Ohio on my due date? And she's like, because I didn't think you'd give birth on your due date. I'm
Oh
like,
my
okay, well.
goodness.
So that was like a whole entire just shock to my nervous system. Like I was like, okay. And she said, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it back tonight. She told me, she was like, can you wait until Monday? I'm like, no, I can't. This was on
Can you wait
Saturday.
until Monday?
I know. And so I was like, okay, okay. And she had had a birth center at the time. She actually was in the process of closing the birth center while during my pregnancy and birth. So I was one of her last home birth patients. But so since she was working with a birth center, there were two other midwives that I had met a couple times. And so she was like, I'm going to send these other two midwives to you. And I'm like, okay, sure.
So she did have a backup in place at
And
least.
definitely, yeah, it
Okay.
wasn't like, automatically like, okay, I'm going to be giving birth unassisted or anything like that. And I had at least met the midwives a couple times. So it wasn't like they were complete strangers, but I definitely didn't feel as comfortable with them as I did with her just because I had known her very well during my pregnancy. And
Right.
so it was really interesting to have those plans shift like that. And
Mm-hmm.
also she also dropped it on me. She was like, oh yeah, and you're still testing positive for GBS, because we had been working for a few weeks to try to clear that up. And so I was like I was doing so many things, so many protocols, and it didn't work. And so all of those pieces of information of like, you're still testing positive for GBS and I'm not going to be at your birth, that kind of
Oof.
like was a challenge to hear
Yes.
when I was in labor. And so I remember like coming into my bedroom and, the birth tub is set up and I'm just like sitting on my bed and I just had a good cry for a minute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I like looked out the window and I remember just thinking to myself, like, okay, like whatever happens, happens. Like I remember kind of like thinking to myself, what happens if I have to go to the hospital? What happens if, I don't feel comfortable with these midwives? What happens if the midwives don't even make it? And
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of took a deep breath and had this overwhelming feeling of like, you're safe. Like, you're safe. Your
Mm-hmm.
baby is safe. Everything is okay. And so then I just stopped crying and then I was like, all right, cool. And then I got kind of excited and got in a different, headspace of like, the plan has changed. Let's just keep going with it.
Yeah.
And so then I
Wow.
just
Okay, I'm going to
started.
pause you just for a minute to make an example out of you in a good way, positive way.
Uh-huh.
I just love how you handled that. Like, you acknowledged the feelings, like, that's really hard to hear. That is a blow. And you let yourself sit with it and you kind of ran through your fears and scenarios and just kind of like let yourself be there for a minute. And then you allowed the peace to come in, which I'm sure was a gift from God. We're like, okay, moving on. Like, that's such a beautiful way to shepherd yourself through your emotional reactions. So good job. And
Thank you.
especially while you're in labor, like, that's not the easiest thing to do, but I'm sure that your ability to move through them in the way that you did allowed your labor to keep going instead of becoming like like stunted or whatever else
Definitely.
complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely didn't want to let myself sit in any kind of stress for too long,
Mm-hmm.
especially while in labor, because, during my entire pregnancy, I was really excited for labor and birth. I expected it to be intense and, challenging in its own ways. But I'm the kind of person, like, I'm very in tune with my body. And talking about getting through emotions, I said that I like teach online and actually teach like somatic experiencing workshops and like how to literally like, release the emotions in your nervous system and, kind of like self-regulation stuff. So I don't know, I was really excited to give birth because it felt like a challenge of like, oh, one of the most intense things your body can go through, bring it on. Like, so
I
I was
love it.
excited for that. So I just got back in the headspace of being, excited about it. Yeah. And so after that moment of plans changing, then I started communicating with one of the other midwives instead of the midwife who was initially going to be there. And so she started telling me, like, I'm at a birthday party, let me know if things get too intense. You know, time your contractions, 511, whatever. And so I was spending a couple hours timing contractions. And this was the most like rage inducing part of my labor. Like, I will never time contractions again in my entire life. And I'll tell you why, because it did not, like, my body did not have typical contraction patterns. And so timing my contractions, it was like my body was telling me things, and then looking at the timing of my contractions was contradicting what my body was
Mm-hmm.
telling me, and it was
Mm-hmm.
very frustrating. And so eventually I almost threw my phone at a wall and broke it because I was just so upset about the contraction timer.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that other people shouldn't time their contractions, but I'm just saying, for me personally, it really was confusing,
Mm-hmm.
because I never had contractions that were longer than like 30 or 40 seconds, during up until I gave birth. And they were very like sporadic. Like, sometimes they would be like 7 or 8 minutes apart. Sometimes they would be 30 seconds apart, and it
Yeah.
was it was really confusing because there was no consistency in it. And so I remember I started timing them around like 2 or 3. And I remember at around 6, I just called the midwife and I was like, I'm done with this whole contraction timing thing. I don't want to be alone anymore. I need you to come. here.
Yes.
And because I went back and forth in my head because I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll be in labor for another 12 hours. Then I don't want her to come here and me to just, not be anywhere close to giving birth. But when I asked my body, like, what do you need right now? I felt like I don't want to be alone. Like, this is getting intense enough to where I need someone in my house. Like, I'm not in a
Mm-hmm.
hospital. I'm not at a birth center. Like, I'm literally alone with my partner in my house, and I need someone here to support
Yeah.
me who has been through birth before.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I called her, and she said that she would, make her way down. And both of the midwives were up more towards Traverse City. And so they were about
Okay.
an hour, hour and a half north of where I was. And so, I called them at around 6:30. They said they would be there at around 8:30. And I was like, okay, I can handle that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the entirety of laboring, alone. And when I say like alone, like my partner was here with me, but I mean like alone in the sense of my birth team wasn't here because,
Yes.
I haven't been through birth, he hasn't been through birth. So we were both just kind of very, like, I'm very grateful to have him.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the same as having a professional who's, been at births and everything. So
Totally.
I was really
Yes.
excited to have them get to my house.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Wow.
and
You're
so,
making me think of that
yeah.
episode we did a while back called Mystery Can't Be Measured. Like the one about how for some people, like the rules of labor just don't apply. Like they just don't fit. And so
Mm-hmm.
people, like you were saying, if you just look at your timer, you're getting discouraged because it seems like nothing's happening the way that
Mm-hmm.
it should be. But when you listened to your body, you could clearly tell that things were progressing. It was getting more serious. And
Definitely.
so you had a completely different set of messages coming from your actual body when you attended to it than you did from when you attended to the
Yes.
numbers and the data. And you made such a
Mm-hmm.
wise choice there to choose to listen to your body over the data.
I think about that sometimes of how if I would have tried to wait until a 511 or whatever, I would have given birth in my house unassisted. And I didn't want that for my
Right.
first baby.
That wasn't your goal. Yeah.
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 No.
So then once you knew they were on the
And I'm
way, that
grateful
kind
to
of,
have them.
yeah. So now they're on their way and you're feeling encouraged by that because like the feminine support
Mm-hmm.
of women who've been through birth is on its way to you. So did that wait go pretty quickly?
Yeah, yeah. That's when time started to really get kind of distorted because the contractions were getting much more intense. And so, I walked around my house a lot of the time. I kind of had like two positions that I would be in during contractions. And when I was really tired, I would like sit on the end of my bed and go through a couple contractions like that. But that was much less comfortable. That was more of just like I needed to sit down.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time I was in labor, I was just like walking, kind of like pacing my house. And then whenever I would have a contraction, I would kind of like put my hands a little above my knees and like kind of like half squat down, like not all the way into a squat, but just like that act of bearing down a little bit felt relieving.
Yeah.
And so I was just doing that pretty much the whole time we were waiting for them to show up. And this is actually, there's a really funny thing that happened because, so we live on a property who, we is owned by a very good friend. And this is the friend that actually recommended us to this midwife. She was the midwife that was there for his daughter's birth. They birthed at the birth center that she owned. And so he is a very good friend, lives down the driveway, and at around 8:10 probably, we see headlights and we're like, "Oh my gosh, the midwife is here early. This is awesome." And I'm like half naked having contractions in the living room, just, and then our neighbor walks in the door and we're like looking at him like, why are you here? And my partner said something like, oh, we thought you were the midwife. And then he looks at us like eyes totally go super wide. He's like, why would the midwife be coming? Are you in labor? And I'm like kneeling over the table having a contraction. And he's like, oh my gosh, are you having a contraction right now? And so that was just such a funny moment because, like, we hadn't told any of our family that we were in labor. The only person I had told was our midwives. And so the fact that our neighbor walks in and now he's the only person who knows that I'm about to have this baby was just so funny. And then when he realized I was in labor, he just sits on the couch and like sits back and is like, "So, how you feel? You nervous?" And so it was a very funny moment to go through right before the midwives did show up. And that kind of like added a bit of humor to a very active labor time. So that was funny. And then he left, and about 20-30 minutes later, the first midwife showed up, and it just felt like an automatic wave of relief when she walked in the door and started setting up all of her supplies, and like it just felt like, okay, someone's here who knows what to do. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
So I was really excited once the midwives got there. And the other midwife showed up at around 9, so about half an hour later. And then a birth assistant who I had never met before, she showed up at around 8:45 as well. So they all showed up in a span of 30 minutes, and it just felt like, it kind of felt like it was nighttime, but metaphorically, like it felt like the sun had come out in a way, because I just felt like it was getting dark. I was kind of like, I wasn't nervous, but I just felt kind of alone. Like you're saying, that like feminine support of like women who know what they're doing, who've been through birth, who've attended a lot of births. It just felt so illuminating when they got here. Like, okay, we've got this. So that was super awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, we just kind of set up the birth tub, started filling it to kind of, make sure everything was ready for when I was ready. And they recommended some different positions to, be in to have contractions and everything. Because my son was in a pretty good position, like pretty much my entire pregnancy. He was kind of at the ready for a long time. So I wasn't, he wasn't sunny side up. Everything was all good in that respect. So they were like, "Oh, if you want to try some different things, you can try like the miles circuit." And I did a couple things, but I didn't like the whole sideline thing. I could not handle having contractions while laying down. That was just something like I tried to go through like 2 or 3 contractions, and I got up and I was like, "Nope, I'm not doing this. I'm never doing that again. Sorry."
Yeah.
And if he would have actually had like a serious like position issue, I would have tried to, make it through that if it was really necessary. But since it wasn't really necessary, I was like, absolutely not. And so I was just walking around the house, having contractions, and something really interesting that was happening the entire time I was in labor that is different from pretty much anyone that I've personally talked to about labor and contractions was, with every single contraction, I passed like blood clots and like had like bloody mucus come with every single contraction, my entire labor. And I just remember the whole time I'm like asking my midwives, like, "Is this normal? Is this normal? Like, you're sure this is normal?" And they explained it to me, some, especially first time moms in labor will bleed with contractions because, your cervix has never dilated before. And so that process of the dilation can cause bleeding in some women. And so I was like, "Oh, cool. All right." But that was just really interesting because we had to like keep my water never broke or anything. So I wasn't leaking fluid or anything like that. But we had to keep pads under me because I was just like, every time I'd have a contraction, like blood clots. And the closer I got to giving birth, the bigger the blood clots got. Like, I remember when I was in the birth tub, I was just pulling out these like large blood clots, like showing my midwife, like, "You sure this is still normal?"
Wow. Yeah, that's very unusual though.
Yeah, it was really, really fascinating. Because I remember the first time I had bloody mucus, I was like, "Oh, that's my mucus plug," whatever.
Right.
Like, and then it just kept happening every single time. And I was like, "Wait, this is not what everyone talks about."
So they expressed no concern in the moment, and even later as you processed it with them, they still were like not worried about it ever?
No, yeah, never worried about it. Apparently that's something, they don't see often, but it's something they've seen before, specifically in first time moms. So they were like not worried at all about it. And And yeah, so I was like, okay. It wasn't freaking me out, but it was just like I was so fascinated on why it was happening because I had never
Yeah.
heard of that before. I'm the kind of person like I really like to know why things are happening. Like I like to know the physiology of like why is this happening. So I just would keep asking them questions about it and everything, and they were more than willing to explain it to me. So I enjoyed that.
I love how even while you're in labor, you're nerding out about the physiology of like the blood
Oh,
clots.
totally.
Like, you have to explain this to me. I know
I
I'm in
thought it
labor,
was
but I have
super
to
cool.
understand.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, and I have absolutely zero like the idea of TMI doesn't even register with me. Like nothing is ever too much information. And like I remember before pregnancy, like during like menstruation and stuff, like I would just get so excited about blood clots. I was like, "Whoa, this came out of me. This is so cool!" Like touch them and stuff. So I do not think that kind of stuff is weird at all. So
Super
I was just
fascinated.
fascinated with the whole
Hmm.
process. Yeah,
That's so cool.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I guess keeping going in the story of labor, once I was really starting to get, you know, like feeling the intensity even more, my midwives talked about, because the tub was ready, and my midwife was telling me like, sometimes when you get in the tub like too early in labor, for some people it can stall labor, and so they usually recommend, if you're comfortable with it, having like a cervical exam before getting into the tub, just so that they can kind of you know take note of where you are and decide together if it's a good idea to get in the tub yet or hold off a little bit
Mm.
longer. So I did consent to that, because especially like I had a friend who told me that she was trying to have a water birth, and she was in the birth tub for like hours and hours and hours, and it just wasn't progressing until she got out of the tub. And so I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take their advice, and just get the cervical check. And that was the most miserable sensation I've ever
Hmm.
experienced.
Not
um,
pleasant.
you know, Oh my gosh, having contractions during a cervical check is just the worst. And, I feel very confident that, as long as my next birth and labor goes in a, somewhat similar fashion, that I won't need that cervical check to be able to tell me where I am. Like, I'll be able to know. But for my first time giving birth, it felt like a good idea to get that second opinion. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
and so, I got the cervical exam, and they said, I was somewhere around 6 centimeters dilated, but not fully effaced or thinned. And so they said, like, I would say, like, you can go ahead and get in the birth tub if you want. And so I got pretty excited about that, because it was very, very comfortable to get in the tub.
Yes.
Um, and Yeah, so I was very, very comfortable. But it wasn't that I was like discouraged at all with them telling me like where I was at, but they made it seem like, from what they've experienced, I could be in labor for like a really long time still, because they were
Mm.
like, "Oh, well, you're not even fully thinned yet, so in our experience, like, you could be in labor until the early morning." And so I was kind of like, okay, sure, whatever. So in my mind, I was not expecting to give birth anytime soon. So I just got into the tub, and I was like, gonna relax. And when I got into the tub, my contractions like completely stopped, pretty much. Like I would have like
Hmm.
little waves of contractions, but they were so gentle, and I didn't even have to like move around during them. I was just like laying back in the tub, and it was just fully comfortable. And so in my mind, I honestly thought my labor was slowing down because of that. And so one of my midwives went into the back room where we had a bed, and like laid down and started to take a nap. And then the other midwife was like getting some food, and then the birth assistant was on her computer doing like logging like information, whatever. And so it was just my partner and I in the room, and I was
Hmm.
like in the birth tub. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it just started like having extremely intense contractions, where I was like, you know, hanging off the side of the birth tub. Like I was on my knees and I like digging my nails into my partner's shoulder and like biting the side of the birth tub with my teeth, like just full on animalistic mode.
Yeah.
And I really couldn't say anything. Like it was just so physical at that point. Like I wasn't asking questions or saying anything. I didn't even want to like call for the midwives because I didn't actually believe that I was about to give birth. Like I don't know what was
Mm.
going through my mind. Well, nothing was going through my mind, but I just like did not believe that I was about to push out my baby. And I remember at one point, the midwife poked her head into the door and was like, "Hey, you know, you're making some really intense sounds. Like, what do you feel? Do you feel anything moving down?" And I told her, all I could say was, I said, "I feel like my butthole's gonna prolapse." That's what I said to her. And she was like,
Yep.
she kind of like laughed. Was like, yeah, I don't think you have to worry about that. Just, you know, don't think about that. Like you're gonna be fine. And I was like,
Yes.
okay, but is it gonna happen? And she's like, I maybe, but don't. It's not that bad. It's not that big of a deal. Like, don't worry about it. And I was like, okay. And so she said, like, let me know when you start to feel something moving down the birth canal, like when you feel his head. And I like didn't even say anything. I was like, cool, okay. And she left and went out into the kitchen again. And at that point, I was definitely, in retrospect, feeling his head moving down the birth canal, but I did not know that that's what I was feeling. And so I
Sure.
didn't want to say that because I didn't really, I just didn't know what was going on. And so me being really interested in the process and wanting to know what was happening, I, you know, stuck a finger up there to see what was
Yeah.
going on. And I felt this like weird bubble kind of thing. And I don't know why I didn't just think that it was like my like sack of waters, because I don't know, I thought it was like some kind of weird organ or body part. I don't even know what I
Yeah.
thought, but I didn't realize that it was like the waters. And I was kind of like feeling around, and then on my next contraction I felt like a gush, and I felt the water break. And I was in the birth tub,
Uh-huh.
so obviously like I didn't see it or anything, but I felt it. And so then I kind of like lifted my head up and I said, "I think my water broke." And then, you know, my midwife kind of like poked her head back in. She's like, "Your water broke?" And I was like, "Yes, I felt it." And she was like, "Okay, cool. You know, still like, again, let me know like anything else you feel." And she left again. And, you know, the bedroom that I was in is literally right next to the kitchen. So she could like hear
Okay.
me, but she just wasn't
Yep.
in the room. Um, and she was giving me a little bit of space. And I think she was, again, like doing some other things. And so I was just feeling around in there. And then I put my fingers back in to see what I felt next. And I felt his head, but I didn't know that it was his head because it didn't, you know, it didn't feel like round like a head. It felt like this like protruding, fleshy, fuzzy, weird thing. And
Yep.
I couldn't in my mind imagine that that was his head because it was so like strangely shaped. And so I just felt really weird. Like I was like, oh goodness, what is this? But I felt like the entire area of like my perineum was like, I felt it start to stretch. And so I was like kind of scared of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um and so I just like had my hand like kind of giving myself a little bit of perineal support. I just had my hand on it. And I hadn't really like it was never like I never thought like I'm going to give myself perennial support, you know, like I
Right.
never had that thought. It just like happened because I felt like I needed my hand there, to, you
Yeah.
know, while everything was stretching. And so then I just, you know, I was with each contraction, I was definitely pushing. And again, I didn't really realize that I was pushing. I was just having intense contractions and pushing without really realizing that that's what was happening. Um, And then I started to feel his head like crowning, and again, all I could think about was my butthole. Like I was so afraid of like something terrible happening back there, and so I was like
Yep.
kind of trying to hold it in because I just didn't want it to happen too fast.
Hmm.
And so he probably could have been born in one contraction, but I didn't let that happen. I was like, nope, not yet, not yet. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I kind of like held him back for like two or three contractions, and then finally I was like, okay, sure, let's do it. And his
Wait,
head
was your
came
midwife
out.
in the room now?
No.
Or she's still in the kitchen when this is happening?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're just so
Yeah.
silently doing your thing.
Well, yeah, not silently. I was like yelling and
Oh, okay.
moaning and making noises, but nothing that said I'm literally pushing his head out right now as we speak. Like I was
Gotcha.
just, making sounds and again like biting. I don't know why I was biting the side of the birth tub because, looking back, like I probably popped the liner. Like I'm pretty sure my midwives had to throw away the whole birth tub, but like I didn't know. I had to.
Yeah, you were just in that primal state,
Yeah.
which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was pretty funny. I was just like, really clawing into my partner and biting the birth tub and push, and so his head came out. His head was out, and I like didn't say anything at first. I was just like feeling it,
Hmm.
like with my hand in the water, just in awe of what just happened. Um,
Yes.
and I was still on my knees and I was just like feeling his head and I was kind of like feeling his face, like seeing what position he was in and just like I just thought it was so cool. It was like, wow. And my partner didn't even know what had happened. I was just in the tub experiencing this by myself pretty much. And then my midwife again poked her head in and she was like, "Okay, that last one sounded really like real. Like are you feeling the baby move down the birth canal?" And I looked up at her and I said, "His head's out." And she was like, "Oh." And so she yelled down to the rest of the birth team. She was like, "The head is born." And so everyone like runs in the room, like completely in shock. Like, what? The head is born? Like, they just kind of felt like, oh my gosh, we missed it.
Yep.
And yeah, and so I was so tired at that point. Again, like, the logic just goes out the window when you're in labor. It's like I felt like I was just done. Like I was like, I did it. Like he's here. He's born. Like I'm done. And my midwife was like, "No, like the rest of his body is still in there, Ella. Like you have to keep pushing." And I'm like, "No, no, I'm done actually."
That's so awesome.
And so that was just kind of a funny moment. And so I was on my knees and then I flipped onto my back, like kind of as if I was like sitting back in a hot tub.
Hmm.
And I laid there for probably like a minute, minute and a half. And then my midwife was like, "Okay, like with your next contraction, I need you to push him out." And I was like, "There are no more contractions. Like no more contractions. It was just over." And I think that was why, like, in my mind, I felt like I was done because my contractions stopped. So I was like, well,
Okay.
I'm not feeling any urge to push anymore. Like, I feel like I could just sit here like this forever.
With a head
And she
between
was
your
like,
legs.
yeah, yeah. She was like, "No, like, you have to get him out now. I'm sorry." And so she asked me to push without a contraction. And
Mm.
I tried, and, I could tell that his shoulder was stuck. And
Hmm.
I was not surprised because the entire last like month of my pregnancy, his shoulder was on my pelvic bone, my
Okay.
pubic bone, and I
Yep.
would feel it every time I would walk. And so I could feel that it was still there. And looking back, like with a completely sober, not in labor mind, I wish I would have tried, some lunging or, some position changes. But
Sure.
honestly, in the moment, I was just so tired. Like I could not think. I didn't want to move my body. I just wanted to lay down. So my midwife was like, "Can I help him?" And I was like, "Yes, yes, you can."
Yeah.
And so, she stuck her finger up there and then, pulled his shoulder off and, he came out. So after my midwife unhooked his shoulder, he came out, which did cause a second-degree tear that I did not feel in the moment. No blood or anything really that was noticeable. And so I pulled him out of the water onto my chest, and he was pink and screaming, and it was the best sound I've ever heard. That was definitely one of the things that in planning a home birth, that was one of the only things I worried about, was him not screaming or making any noises or being alert or, obviously, looking healthy coming out. And so that was just the biggest gift that I've ever been given in my life, is just him just automatically being okay the moment he came out. And so that was wonderful. And I was just laughing hysterically, and my partner was laughing, and we were just smiling at each other, and I just kept saying he's real, and laughing, and it was really amazing. And he was screaming right in my ear, and I loved it. And one of the birth assistant asked hey, do you guys want a picture of this? And we were like, oh yeah, sure. And so she snapped a few pictures of that moment. And so that's the only picture that I have of the entire labor and birth experience. And I'm really grateful to have that, because I would have never thought about it. Because that was something we had talked about before, giving birth, was do we want pictures? And my partner and I both kind of agreed that we didn't want that to be a focus of this specific labor and birth experience. But I am really grateful to have those kind of couple snapped images of that moment. So yeah. And then they asked me if I wanted to stay in the tub for the placenta, or if I wanted to move to the bed. And I wanted to move to the bed because that was one of the only things about water birth that really freaked me out was, when the placenta came out and the whole birth tub kind of turned red and everything with blood. I did not like anytime I would see pictures or videos of it, it would just make me feel really uneasy. And so I wanted to be able to see the amount of blood coming out of me and not have it diluted in water. So I got into the bed, and, the placenta came, and I felt a little bit of stinging when the placenta came out. And so I asked my midwife, I'm like, ooh, how's it looking down there? And she told me that I tore, and I was like, okay, which was fine. And so she just, had some lidocaine shots and stitched me up right there.
Great.
And yeah, it was great. They said, showed me the placenta and everything, and they said it was one of the thickest, healthiest placentas they've seen in a while. And I was shocked at that, honestly. That was something I was kind of worried about. And so just that was a wonderful thing to hear.
Yeah, that's a huge compliment. I mean, when your midwife tells you you have a great placenta, you can feel pretty proud.
Yeah. It's still in our freezer right now, so I'm, excited to see it again at some point when we decide.
Mine is still in my freezer too.
Nice.
I have 2 of them in there now. I don't even know what I'm doing.
I love that.
So do you happen to know how many minutes between when his head was born and when his body was born?
For me, time was super weird. But
I would expect that.
Yeah. To me, it felt like both a long time and not a long time at the same time, that weird feeling. But my partner said it was probably 2. He said it was probably 2 minutes, so it was probably 3 minutes total, because it was a minute before I even told him that the head was out. So
gotcha. Oh, yeah. I think that's so beautiful that you have that private moment with your baby before anyone else knew. That's super special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt really special just to have those first moments, just the 2 of us, being able to just feel his head like that. And I didn't feel rushed. And I just, it goes back to that overwhelming feeling of safety. I didn't feel oh my goodness, we have to get him out. I need to know that he's okay, because I just knew that he was okay. And I knew that it was okay to just wait there for a minute. And that it was just, and that was really unlike the normal way that I function, because I tend to be a, kind of worst case scenario thinker. And that was
Mm.
something that was really interesting about labor to me, was that since I didn't really have time to think, or, since thinking wasn't really the mode that I was in, I
Yeah.
just felt no anxiety, other than I told you I felt scared about, prolapsing my butthole. But other than that, like, I didn't feel any anxiety about my own safety or about his safety. It just felt like I knew that we were safe. And that
Mm.
was the best feeling.
That's beautiful. Well, and you had that word in your spirit before, very early on in your labor too, that you were
Mhm.
safe. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that carried you also. I was just curious about how long between head and body, because so a true, like when you have a baby whose shoulders are stuck, whether it's just sticky
Mhm.
shoulders or true dystocia, they say you have about 5 minutes to resolve that situation before you're in probably serious trouble. So it sounds like you didn't make it close to the 5 minutes, but your midwives must have seen like, this baby needs some help getting past that pubic bone.
Yeah. 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 Like she wasn't like, it didn't seem like, an emergency, but she did like say to me, like, we need to get him out, like she
Yeah.
didn't feel like it was safe to wait that much longer. And so I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
fine. Okay, fine. Because I just felt like
Yeah.
I wanted to like be done.
I completely understand. Yeah. In fact, again, that
Mhm.
happened with my baby who was born 2 weeks before yours.
Yeah.
Same, like his head came out
Wow.
and then his shoulders. I was trying to push, but he wouldn't quite come. And then my midwife, or I think I asked her to help. I was like, will you please help? And again, I probably, like you said, could have done the lunges,
Yeah.
the position changes, and that might have worked, just with a little more time, but I was just done. So I'm laughing at how many
Yeah.
similarities we
I
have
was
here
so
in
done.
certain things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm so glad he was crying right away and vigorous, and that, man, what a relief. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the scene you describe is just absolutely like euphoric. The laughter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm actually, right now I'm sitting in the spot that I pulled him up to my chest in our bedroom. So
That's
I
so
thought it was the
cool.
perfect place to do this.
Yes, that's perfect. Uh, okay. Are there any more details about your birth or immediate postpartum you want to share, like about your placenta birth or anything else that
The
sticks out
only
to you?
other little tidbit, yeah, the only other little tidbit that I would share is just kind of a funny moment of like, kind of encapsulates why I wanted a home birth and why a home birth was the absolute perfect thing that we could have done, was because the day before I went into labor, we made a big pot of potato soup. And then after I gave birth, during the golden hour, my partner went and heated up the leftover potato soup that we had made. And then while my midwives were doing the newborn exam and all of my son's measurements, I was just sitting on my bed naked eating potato soup. And it was the best moment. just just it was so cool. I was so happy and so comfortable, and I loved being in my own bed and eating homemade food.
Yes.
And it was also just funny because I didn't feel the need to put clothes on. I
Mm-hmm.
had 4 people in the room with me, and I was just super okay with being completely naked.
Yeah.
And I just that's really the end of my immediate birth story was that moment of sitting naked eating potato soup.
And in that moment, you realized this is one of the reasons I decided to stay home.
Yes.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I love how that eating potato soup naked on your bed is like the pinnacle moment of not the pinnacle, but like
Yes.
one of your reaffirming of your choice kind of moments.
Mm-hmm.
So great.
Definitely.
Well, I know one other thing you wanted to share about as part of this podcast episode was about your breastfeeding journey. And I would just love to invite you to share about that too.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just start like, specifically like after I gave birth to him, before the midwives left, they, guided us on, latching and breastfeeding. And it was something that really did not come easily for either of us, and it was just really challenging to get a latch, and he didn't really latch those first couple times. I think he did for like a couple moments, and might have gotten a little sucking motion, but it really didn't happen. And then I was really overwhelmed and didn't really try initially. After that, I just let him sleep for
Hmm.
a few hours, and then I started to get stressed about it towards the morning around like 6 or 7 a.m. I started to feel like a lot of pressure because he hadn't latched yet. And I was finally able to get him to latch at around 7 a.m. He was born at midnight.
Yeah.
And so that was, obviously like automatically kind of a red flag that he wasn't able to do that effectively. But that's one of the things about a home birth when you don't have adequate, lactation support and you don't have experience with breastfeeding before. That's something that being at home alone after the midwives had left, just 6 hours after my baby had been born, I felt really alone and confused and stressed about the breastfeeding,
Sure.
and I didn't want him to go hungry. We didn't even have bottles or, obviously formula or anything like that. And so I just felt this like really immense pressure to make it work and to figure
Hmm.
it out. And I think that initial feeling of stress along with his, uh, kind of inability to latch effectively, it just kind of created this like snowball of stress. And he did latch and he would latch for a little amount of time each, and then he would fall asleep, and so it was just kind of like classic signs of, oral dysfunction and, just something not being right. But the midwife initially checked his tongue for like ties, and he didn't have any kind of like, you know, ties that were um you know significantly visible, like she
Sure.
couldn't see anything. But she did say like he had restricted movement of his tongue, and so but that was all she said. She didn't say anything else. It just kind of like, went over my head. Like I didn't even know what she meant by that. um but then, a few days went by, and I just looking at him, like he just didn't seem like he was getting what he needed. And I just had that like mama feeling of like,
Hmm.
he's like something's not right. Um, and he was drinking. I could hear him swallowing, and he was latching, and it wasn't painful. And my milk came in, I was engorged, and then, the engorgement subsided and everything was happening normally, but I could just tell that he wasn't getting enough milk. And he was cluster feeding 24/7 for the first
Wow.
3 weeks of his life. Like literally, I did not stop feeding him for weeks.
Wow, that's
Um,
exhausting.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I would have like midwife visits, and she would weigh him, and like I remember when she came for the 2 week visit, she said something over the phone like she was excited to see us, and she was saying like, "Oh, I bet he's starting to get little like baby rolls." And I just like felt my heart sink because looking at him, like he was
Mm,
getting skinny, like he wasn't putting on any weight, and it just like
mm.
literally broke my heart looking at him and just
Yeah.
feeling like all of this pressure and feeling like there was something wrong with me, or there was something wrong with him, or I wasn't giving him what he needed, or I wasn't enough for him. And it was just like all these racing
Hmm.
thoughts of like, how can I get him what he needed? And, he wasn't losing weight. He was gaining like maybe an ounce a week. And, that's not enough. He wasn't, and the thing is like he was alert and happy and content, but just always hungry and not
Yeah.
gaining weight.
Okay.
And he was peeing all the time and pooping, and so I was like so
Hmm.
confused,
Yeah, it would be confusing. Yeah.
and I had never done this before.
Right.
And so yeah, that was it was just so confusing. And all the people in my life, in the sense of like who I listen to for advice, are more on the side of like, oh, everyone can breastfeed if they want to, like there's really no reason that you wouldn't be able to breastfeed your son. There's no reason you wouldn't be making enough milk. There's always ways to make enough milk, blah, 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 all of this like
Uh-huh.
kind of like lactation advocacy in my ears of like,
Yeah.
your son is fine, everything's going to be fine, you're going to be able to exclusively breastfeed, like don't worry about it, just keep feeding him, keep cluster feeding, it'll be fine. And after about 3 weeks, I just like I hit my limit. Like I was like, no, like this is not fine. He's not fine. This is not working. And he needs more. And so I got in with a lactation consultant, and we, did some weighted feeds, and he would kind of get like between maybe an ounce, uh, at most. And so he was drinking, but not that much. Even at a
Yeah.
month old, he was still only getting like an ounce and a half, 2 ounces max. And so he also just seemed like, he liked to use his muscles. He has, since he's been born, he has a pretty fast metabolism. And so even though like he's getting milk and I'm making milk, it's not, like it's not enough for him to gain weight. It's enough for him to be healthy, and, his brain is functioning
Yeah.
perfectly. He's peeing, but he just needed more to be able to gain weight. And so I started triple feeding, because, everyone's like, oh, well, if you triple feed and, pump after every time you feed, then you'll be able to make enough milk for him.
Mm.
And so I did that for weeks. No change. No
Wow.
change in my milk supply, no change in his weight gain.
Hmm.
And oh my gosh, it was just, that was the hardest couple weeks of my life,
I
doing
bet.
that. And it was like completely unsustainable. And I felt this like
Yes.
guilt of like, why can't I do this for him? And like, and
Hmm.
it was getting to the point for me where pumping and feeding was taking up like 90% of the time that I was awake, was pumping or feeding.
Yeah, you're
And
not even enjoying your baby
I,
at that point. You're just a
no,
milk machine,
I
and your
wasn't.
head is consumed with it entirely, and there's no space for anything else. And
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
sounds
and I was starting
terrible.
to get like really, really triggered and just like intrusive
Hmm.
thoughts. And I was starting to like remember like traumatic experiences like from when I was younger, and like just like all kinds of issues associated with overstimulation of my breasts. And
Uh-huh.
I needed a break.
Yeah.
Um, and I just felt like I felt like defeated, as if like kind of like I would have judged myself. Like, before experiencing that, if someone would have told me that, I would have been like, well, you probably could have just tried harder, and like then
Yeah.
going through it was so humbling, because I was like, no, like it's not as simple as a lot of people try to kind of like make it seem. And it's not a matter of like you have to do everything it takes to be able to exclusively breastfeed your baby, because honestly, like you don't, and that's what I've
Yeah.
learned is it's okay when things are too much. It's okay that, triple feeding for weeks on end is overstimulating. And I would rather enjoy time with my baby than be hooked up to a pump stressing out about how I'm going to be able to make enough milk for him.
Absolutely.
And, that was really liberating once I finally accepted that. And like I
Hmm.
went through a lot of grief about it, because I wanted to exclusively breastfeed. Like that was the goal. I didn't even buy bottles, because I was like, I'm just gonna breastfeed him, like it's fine.
Yeah.
And so, we had to go to the store and buy bottles. And at first, we were getting milk from a milk donor, someone that our midwife knew, because I was still under this impression of like, no, like formula is evil, and I will never give my baby a drop of formula. I'm going to do everything I can to, just keep him on breast milk, even if it's not my breast milk.
Yeah.
But this was another one of those humbling moments, because, you know, I was getting milk from someone with a really extreme oversupply, and
Yeah.
people with oversupplies, what I had read, and I'm not an expert on this, but from what I've read, sometimes people with oversupplies can have an excess of lactose in their milk, especially
Ah.
the milk that she was pumping and freezing. And so the milk that he was getting from her was causing a reaction in him as well. And so he still wasn't
Mm.
gaining weight, even though we were supplementing, and he was having,
Interesting.
just reactions to the breast milk as well. And so then I was like, okay, well, let's find a formula that we feel comfortable with, the ingredients, and let's buy it, and let's, try that. And it's like
Yeah.
right when we started giving him formula, it's like everything just got better. You know, he
Oh,
started gaining weight, he was healthy, and I was able to breastfeed him without stressing, and I was able to
yes.
enjoy every time I fed him. And still
Mm.
to this day, like I enjoy breastfeeding him so much, and like I
Mm.
love latching him and I love nursing him to sleep. And we're at a point now where, you know, I can nurse him throughout the night, and, you know, I can nurse him multiple times in the day and he'll be satisfied. And then he just gets like 3 to 4 bottles of formula. And, you know, that's what he needs to gain weight and be healthy. And
Great.
I, you know, am at a point now where I'm okay with that, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm starting to find the positive aspects of it. Like, you know, that if it's been a rough night and he's been up all night, I can take a 3 hour nap and my partner can give him a bottle of formula while I, you know, sleep.
Totally.
Or I can go on a hike with my dog and not worry about, is he going to get hungry, you know? And so, even though, you know, exclusive breastfeeding is something that I hope to be able to experience with a future child or children, like that's something that
Mhm.
I would love to experience, I've accepted that that's not the journey that I have with my
Yeah.
son right now,
Yep.
and that that's okay. And so that was
Yeah.
like just one of those things. Like at first, I just felt like really, really upset about it, and just so much grief and guilt and sadness. And then like tuning into like the fact that every child is different, every journey is different, and that that's okay. And trusting
Yes.
that process. That's been a really, really big lesson for me, and kind of like
Mm.
the one big lesson of motherhood so far of like, you know, it's okay to adjust your goals, and just be okay with that. And the way that I like to kind of categorize it in my mind is like there's a difference between ideals and values, because like I had all these
Mm.
ideals of like, I'm gonna be an exclusively breastfeeding mom, you know, I'm a home birth mom, like whatever, like all these ideals of like 100% or nothing. And then having to like have those ideals completely shattered of like, but what if it's not possible? And then having to be like, okay, well, that's just this ideal that I held on this pedestal, but the underlying value is that I want to have a breastfeeding relationship with my son, and I want to give him the nutrients of my breast milk, and I want to be able to comfort him and, you know, have a way to get him to sleep, and I want to be able to feed him when we're out in public, and like those kind of like underlying things that I want for my son and I want for myself, those don't have to be compromised just because I wasn't able to meet this ideal of exclusively breastfeeding. And so that's what I really want to like verbalize, because I think that that's
Yes.
important for so many new moms to hear, even if it's not about breastfeeding, like whatever it is, like it's okay to adjust and then tune into those ideal, or to tune into those values, and like not just be so idealistic and like I have to
Mm.
be perfect to be able to make it work.
Oh, I want to give you a standing ovation for that. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for saying all that. That is such a valuable message. I love what you did there, like the separating out ideals from values and realizing that once you can get down to your values, you might find that there are other ways to live in accordance with your values while also letting go of your ideals. That's so brilliant. Um, and wow, that
Yeah,
is, I mean, I can 100% understand why that was such a humbling journey for you to go on to get to that point where you were like willing to introduce formula into part of your breastfeeding and feeding relationship with him. But I think really, like Lauren and I talk about this a lot. This is what makes a good birth, what makes a good mother, what makes a good like feeding relationship isn't that we do it perfectly according to our highest ideals, but that we are sensitive to God and to the baby that's right in front of us, and that we like listen to that above our dogmatic
absolutely.
opinions. And so you just illustrated that so perfectly regarding how you feed your baby. And yeah, that's so great. And I love knowing that because you were able to let go of your ideal, you can now actually enjoy and relish the times when your baby's latched on. Like, no,
Mm-hmm.
there's like the weight is off of it now because you know you have some other support coming in to give him the nutrients he needs. And so you can simply just be with him. And breastfeeding
Absolutely.
isn't just about nutrition, it's about connection and bonding. And that was getting ruined for you, right? By the
Yeah.
enormous amount of pressure and fear and anxiety that was surrounding it. And
Hmm.
now you have that back. So,
Yeah.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for talking about that. It's really important. And I'm really excited for people to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you had mentioned like that's kind of can be one of the downsides of a home birth is that lactation, the watchfulness and the lactation support isn't necessarily built in. So if you
Hmm.
could like rewrite that, like what would you do differently? Either like a choice you would make or something you wish was different about the midwifery model of care. How would you change it?
Yeah, well, something that I will do differently the next time, and something that, if people ask me like how they should prepare if they're having a home birth, like what the advice that I would give to people is like have lactation support lined up, and also just like postpartum support in general. Because a lot of midwives are really great with doing home visits postpartum, and I loved all of my home visits postpartum and everything. But specifically to be able to have lactation support that is accessible to me would have been really really helpful, and I think would have helped me feel a lot less alone. Because as much as my midwife, who came multiple times in the weeks following my birth, like she was really supportive, but I just think like I needed someone who was even more versed in the issues that we were having, which I think potentially would be like I'm not sure because I haven't had him um, uh, addressed for the specificness of his issues, but like people who understand oral restriction that isn't just a classic tongue tie,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of general lactation consultants don't really know how to handle that.
Yeah.
And especially the people that I've had in my journey. So I would have loved to have hired a board certified lactation consultant who really could have helped us with that and helped me feel empowered in that journey in those first few weeks. Because as much as I'm grateful for where we are now, like those weeks, like I can't get those back. And
Mm-hmm.
I I wish that I didn't spend so much time being afraid and feeling guilty and scared and alone with that journey. And I don't want anyone else to go through that. And so it's
Yeah.
like if you're having a home birth and you have, the midwife support, like it's also good to consider what you would do if you need lactation support as well. And because I said like one of the downsides of having a home birth is that, but I know a lot of people have similar issues with hospital births, lactation support
Yeah.
not being good enough, or dismissing issues, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, pushing formula when you don't need it, whereas in my case it was telling me not to use formula when I needed it. And so it's like really just listening to your own like mom intuition about it, and then like getting the support that you need. um yeah, and like again, something I love about home birth midwife care is how much they follow up with you postpartum. And so I'm not saying that that wasn't enough, but just specifically with like lactation support, and like especially if your partner is not able to be at home with you all the time, like being able to have extra support that's specifically there for you in those early days postpartum, because it can be crazy. Like you give birth to your baby, and 3 hours later, you're just alone with your
Yep.
baby.
Yeah.
And that's, I remember that feeling of like, oh my gosh, like you feel like a little kid left alone with like a hot frying pan. It's like, I don't know what to do with this.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I remember the night our first was born and the midwives left, 2-ish, 3 hours after, or whatever. And she was laying there in the little bassinet right beside her bed. And my husband
Mm-hmm.
looked at her and he goes, "We have to keep her alive until morning." I was like, "Yes, we
Yeah,
do." And it's like, how do we do that? I felt, yeah,
I
like just
know.
being
I
like,
was
sink
so
or swim. Like, here you
terrified.
go. Throwing you in the water.
Yeah, I didn't even know like how to carry a baby. Like I hadn't even really been around babies. Like I was an only child and just like no, I'm pretty young and so none of my friends really had babies and so I just had no idea what to do. I just like stayed in bed and didn't even move him off my chest because I'm like I don't want to hurt you. And then I
Yeah.
just didn't sleep for like an entire week because I was afraid to like sleep at the same time that he was sleeping. So I was like, no,
Mhm.
I have to stay awake
Mhm.
and watch him sleep, So
Yeah.
that's just it's one of those things like when you're at home from the beginning, it feels a little bit daunting sometimes, especially as a first time mom.
Yeah, that's really true. So I almost hear you saying it's like you can't have too much support. Like err on the side of
Yes.
too much support when it like postpartum doula, maybe like a lactation consultant, whatever,
Yes.
or even if those people are not professionals, but just loving people who are pretty knowledgeable and can just kind of like
Yeah.
be with you through that adjustment period and help you like be a second set of eyes to notice this isn't quite right, or this could be a little different, or it really is safe for you to sleep while the
Hmm.
baby sleeps, or
Yeah. Yeah.
this,
Just having any kind
yeah.
of extra
So line up
support.
more support than you think you need. And then if you don't need it, great. But
Exactly. Yeah, if I would have hired a lactation consultant and then had a perfectly easy breastfeeding journey and not needed it, I like that's definitely better than, feeling like you won't need it and then really needing it and
yeah,
feeling like alone in the ocean and not knowing where you are, and that's it's just a scary, scary thing to go through without support. So yeah, and I
yeah,
thought like cuz I was kind of told from all of these different places, both like, you know, birth influencers and, my midwife and people who have given birth. It's like I kind of was told and fed these statistics of like, people who have C-sections in the hospital or medicated births are less likely to be able to breastfeed, whereas people who have home births are like almost 100% likely to be able to breastfeed. And so I heard that and I was like, well, I'm having a home birth and I'm having an unmedicated home birth, so I shouldn't have issues breastfeeding.
yep,
And I wish that it wouldn't have been fed to me like that because, like I had a friend who had a baby very close to me and she had an emergency C-section in the hospital and was able to breastfeed immediately after and has not had any breastfeeding issues. Whereas I had this ideal, perfect, unmedicated home birth and then had a really traumatic feeding experience at first. So it's like,
hmm,
it's never going to be this black and white experience of like, this is what the statistics say, so this is what you're going to experience. So definitely line up that support. And if you don't have it lined up, like at least don't be afraid to reach out for it when you need it.
yep. Good word. Very good word. And I'll add to that just that when you are so freshly postpartum and your hormones are doing all the adjusting, there's also emotions and it's hard to make decisions, and your brain is not in a like problem solving mode. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
again, that's just another reason why it can feel so overwhelming to like, you didn't think you needed the support, and then you're trying to find it while also having all your postpartum hormonal shifts. Like, it would
Yeah,
have been much
definitely.
easier if in your rational pre postpartum brain, you could have said, there's a lactation consultant over here who comes highly recommended. I have made a phone call to her to establish a relationship. Her phone
Yes.
number is here beside my bed. All I have to do is call it when I need it.
Yes, I was in a total state of overwhelm and I was trying to look into
Yeah.
things and then I was so overwhelmed because I was like, well, what if he does have a tongue tie and then I have to get it released, but it's like not, a typical tongue tie, so what if it doesn't even work and I put him through this procedure for nothing, and I was
Mm-hmm.
so overwhelmed that I just shut down and I didn't do anything and I didn't call anyone because I didn't know what to do. So
Yeah.
I would have loved to have really thought about that before because my headspace was just so obsessed with like labor and birth that I didn't even think about postpartum support because I was just so like focused on the actual birth process. But, in my experience now, like labor and birth, it's just like a few hours or a day or a couple days, like it's such a short amount of time compared to all of what you go through after you have a baby. And so it's like, it's
Mm-hmm.
great to have all the support possible during labor and birth, but that is like really just the beginning.
Yeah, I have this workshop I've done live several times and now have available like on demand, but it's called Trust God, Trust Birth. And in it, I talk about how preparing for a birth without preparing for postpartum is kind of like preparing for your wedding and forgetting to prepare for your marriage. Like, right?
Yeah.
It's a few hours, 12 hours, 24 maybe even, but compared to a lifetime of,
Hmm.
yeah. So but it is often overlooked. You're certainly not alone in forgetting to think about that part. And it's understandable too, because the birth part is very intense. It's a very like a peak moment, and it's a great
Very
unknown,
climactic.
and it's so epic, and there's so much to like especially when you're crossing over that for the first time, it's understandable that we focus on it so much and to the exclusion of what comes after. So I'm grateful for you also for bringing up that point, because I'm hoping a lot of first-time moms listen to this episode and will glean a lot of wisdom from your story today. Yeah. So thank you for reaching out and offering to share your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is so wonderful. I love sharing, and I just, I feel like everyone in my life has gotten kind of a little bit sick of me talking about my birth story, because I can't stop, because it's awesome.
It is an awesome story. It's truly a really lovely birth story. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're awesome. You're a great, great mom, and really good storyteller.
Thank you.
And I will put in the show notes for listeners who want to find out more about your band or your somatic work. We can put that in the show notes for people. But thank you again for being here. And would you, this is totally putting you on the spot, would you be willing to say a brief prayer over our listeners?
Sure.
Okay.
Dear Heavenly Father, I pray that every person listening to this episode, wherever and whenever you hear this, I hope you find something valuable, and that if you are preparing for birth, that you are able to have a beautiful, empowered birth experience. You're able to listen to yourself and to the guided plan that God has set out for you. And if you're listening to this for any other reason, I hope that you find value in it in your journey of motherhood and beyond, and that you have a blessed journey. Thank you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Holy Wild Birth. We hope that you were genuinely encouraged, inspired, and challenged by what you heard today. If you're loving what you hear, please make sure that you share it. Leave reviews. That helps other mamas find this content as well. And don't forget to read the show notes, okay? Because that's where you can find our email address if you want to reach out to us and start a conversation. It's also where you'll find free offerings as well as invitations to work with me and or Lauren. We can't wait to get to know you. See you next week.